Joining us now is Hussain Kanji. Hussain is the founding partner in Hoxton Ventures, a young London high-performing venture capital firm. And Hussain, welcome. It's fantastic to have you with us today.
It's great to be here.
You're on record as embracing a path to freedom and self-sufficiency for entrepreneurs. Why?
Well, and the best way to control your own destiny is to be free of capital requirements or capital financing needs, which means that if you can get to profitability or get to control your own destiny, people should be lining up to give you money versus you having to look for money. It's always a much better way to be, but it's hard. It's very difficult for a company to get to that kind of scale.
Yeah. So if you can get to where you have customer traction, if you can get a young venture to where there's traction, how materially does that change the terms with which they can raise money from people like you?
I think generally the more traction you see in a more condensed fashion, the easier it is to raise money. So it's one thing if you're a software as a service business and you're raising your first round of capital, your first kind of institutional round of capital, the average benchmark is about $1 million of recurring revenue on an annualized basis, about $100,000 a month. If you can do that in the course, if you can get to the $1 million in a very short amount of time and get to 4, 5, 10 million ARR before you actually ever need to raise any capital, you end up with a queue of investors because you're outperforming by a wide margin the market, and everyone understands what the market is. And so anytime you outperform the market and you can do it in a condensed period of time, it sends a signal. Yeah, it sends a signal you're special.
Yeah.
And we're all looking for the special things that turn out to be unicorns.
So you sit in the heart of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in London. As you look at the kinds of businesses that are raising capital here, what kind of businesses do you see doing this process that you've described of bootstrapping in the early days, getting money from customers, and then raising capital from institutions later?
So it's very, very, very varied. We've seen companies that are doing ad tech businesses. That's very popular right now, mostly because London has a lot of creative agencies, a lot of advertising here, and so you can sell technology into them. You don't actually need tons of capital to be able to build the product in those cases. You can find sectors harder to raise institutional capital, mostly because those companies don't turn out to become the billion-dollar companies of tomorrow. They turn to be acquisitions for other folks. So they scale, but they scale up to a finite amount. So it's easy to get started, hard to scale. We see a lot of software as a service businesses or companies that are selling enterprise software to folks. Again, in the old days, it used to take 5, 10 million of capital to be able to build a product. Today, because of the cloud, it's much cheaper. So those companies, if they work, they can actually motor. And so we see a bunch of those. We see consumer businesses in London as well. Those, I think, easy again to build product, really hard to scale because you have to fund your customer acquisition. And so once you start getting customers, unless you're one of these viral, very organically driven things like a Facebook or a Dubsmash, that's the one, one of the things where that's scaled in Europe. You generally tend to need to put a lot of money and be behind customer acquisition, which means you kind of need an investor from day one.
So getting to scale, you argue, requires money in those kinds of businesses. How about getting started? Can you get them started at some level without outside money?
Yeah, getting started in ad tech easy, getting started in enterprise software easy, getting started in consumer also very, very, very easy. Mobile development tools are pretty widespread at this point.
And they don't cost very much.
They don't cost very much. Even putting together a small team of 2, 3 people won't cost you that much money. I mean, the downside of consumer businesses is they don't generate revenue until they hit scale, usually. So you've got to finance that loss for a while, but the loss can be very minimal. To be fair, it could be, if you're a developer, it could be you and one other person, and the next thing you know, you have something like an Instagram, right, that starts taking off. The viral ones are very easy to do without any funding whatsoever. And again, those are the companies, the WhatsApps, the Instagrams, the Snapchats that had a queue of investors lining up because they were getting traction with and without spending anything. The other ones tend to need money to come in through the door. You build a next generation travel site. Very easy to build these days, but you're going to have to go spend money on advertising to get people to walk through the door. And it's no different than, say, a retail business in that sense, right? You've got to spend money on advertising.
Right. So Hussain, can we talk about an example there?
Yeah. So one of my companies that I ended up investing in personally was a company called Yieldify. So super easy business. All they do is they have a shopping cart abandonment tool. So something like 70% of the people who are shopping for products online don't bother checking out.
70.
Oh yeah, it's really high. It might even be close to 80%. It's a very, very, very high number. And the best-in-class guys, the Amazons of the world, know how to get you over the finish line and actually get you to check out. The average retailer online suffers from this problem. They just don't have that. They don't have that DNA or technology inside. Amazon's very good about guiding you through the process. So these guys, young guys, at that point they were in their 20s, built software. In fact, they outsourced some of the development to Cairo, so it was very low cost, and built something, and then figured out a sales engine to get the retailers to start adopting this. You know, they got to about 10,000 pounds a month when I was looking at them, come entirely bootstrapped. It was just them plus their developers, but they were generating enough money to be able to hire the N+1 developer, and then after a certain amount of development, it became N+1 sales. By the end of the next year, they were doing about $800,000 a month in revenue, entirely bootstrapped.
Still bootstrapped and customer funded.
Yeah, entirely customer funded. 135 employees, I think. No, it might have been about 80 employees at that point. And then they kept going, and this is one that got to, at $800K a month. This is almost a 10 million ARR business. Skipped all the venture guys in Europe because they didn't think the venture guys in Europe would pay a premium for them. Went straight to New York. Actually, the way they found the New York guys, they didn't actually pitch. They got to New York, they started doing really well signing up retailers, so word of mouth spread in the venture community.
They got found.
And they got found by multiple folks, at which point they called me and said, maybe we should run a proper process and talk to some more folks. So they got found by 2 or 3 people, and they talked to about 10 people. And they raised an $11 million round from Google and SoftBank at a pretty high number. But up until that point, minus the little bit of money that they'd raised from some angels, and most of the angel money was not for the money, it was for the advice and the help. So it was myself and another fellow, Robin Klein, who was a partner at that point at Index and now has his own fund. And they didn't raise very much from either of the two of us, but they wanted us there for counseling, advice, exactly. Yeah. So, and now I think is on track to do about $2 million a month in revenue, another 6 months later. So phenomenal growth. I think now about 200 people.
Fantastic story.
Yeah.
What about SaaS businesses? You have quite a number of them in your portfolio.
Yeah, so the nice thing about the SaaS businesses is they can do this. So Yieldify is an example of a SaaS business. I think the hard part about SaaS is you have to crack sales. So sales don't come automatically, even if you're an online business. You've got to do content marketing. You've got to do direct sales. You've got to do indirect sales. You've got to build the machine. And I think most entrepreneurs spend a lot of time building the software and assume
and not building the customer base.
Exactly, and they think the customers will come. And to be fair, most customers should come, but you've got to build the sales engine that's going to attract them, and you got to do it in a low-cost way that will allow you to grow organically. It can be done. It's not as well understood in Europe as it is in the U.S. on how to do it, because most sales guys here are order takers. Most sales guys in the U.S. can actually build a book of business. Here, if you're working for a large technology company, you tend to walk in the door and they kind of already heard of you, right? And you're there to pick up the check and pick up the order, not to build a book entirely from scratch. So our training here is a little bit different. We found the best guys are really young kids. Yeah, that's what Yieldify did. That's in another one of our companies, Darktrace, which is also in the kind of single-digit millions a month in revenue. We invested, they were doing about 100K a month. But they hire these kids, they train them up.
Let them go.
Let them go, and if the software is really good, the software will sell itself. Yeah, and so you do need the person to kind of knock on the door and be aggressive and hustle, but the software will sell itself. So there is truth towards the software selling itself, and you need the machine more than anything else. And that's hard. I think that's the hard part about SaaS businesses.
Well, nobody said being an entrepreneur was easy, right?
No, and if you do it well, you can do very well, right? So that's the upside.
Yeah. What about subscription businesses where people keep sending a check other than SaaS?